In this lesson, we'll be looking at perfect squares and factoring. And by the end of the lesson, you will be able to factor a perfect square trinomial. So square of a sum or square of a difference. These are kind of some shortcuts for us. So a minus b squared, that really means a minus b times a minus b. And if we distribute, we get a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. We could also have the square of a sum, which means these are adding. So a plus b squared actually means a plus b times a plus b. And when we distribute, we get a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Now don't confuse that with a squared minus b squared. See the difference in this one and this one? The square's on the outside, and this one's on the square of the inside. So this one actually breaks down to a plus b, a minus b. So how do we identify if it's a perfect square? Three things have to happen. The first term has to be a perfect square, the last term has to be a perfect square, and the middle term is 2 times the square root of the first term times the square root of the last term. And remember, the last term has to be positive. So if I'm looking at this trinomial, m squared plus 16m plus 64. Is this a perfect square? Yes. Is this a perfect square? Yes. Is the middle term 2 times the square root of 1, which is 1, times the square root of 64, which is 8. 2 times 1 times 8 is 16. So yes, it is a perfect square trinomial. How do we factor it? So always, first thing, look for the GCF. And then in your parentheses goes the square root of the first term, and then plus or minus, depending on the original equation, times or plus the square root of the last term. The sign of the middle term decides if this is positive or negative. So if this one is negative, these two are negative. If this is positive, these two are positive. All right, so let's determine if the trinomial is a perfect square. First question, is this a perfect square? Yes. Is this a perfect square? Yes. Is the middle term 2 times the square root of 1 times the square root of 36? 2 times 1 times 6 is 12. That's 12. So yes, it's a perfect square trinomial. Is this a perfect square? Yes. Is this a perfect square? Yes. Is the middle term 2 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 49? 7. 2 times 2 is 4, times 7 is 28. No. So it is not a perfect square trinomial. All right, so let's factor this. See if we can use this shortcut and see if we can just find that it is the square of a difference. Is this a perfect square? Yes. This one? Yes. Is the center term 2 times the square root of 1 times the square root of 16? 2 times 1 times 4 is 8, which means that I can do 9. The square root of this is 4. This is a subtraction squared. All right, let's check the next one. Perfect square? Yes. Perfect square? Yes. Is the middle term 2 times the square root of 4p squared, which is 2p, times the square root of 9r squared, which is 3r. 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12pr. So yes, that's that one. So 2p comes from here. The 9r is 3r, and the plus is there, and it's squared. Let's try this one. Perfect square? Yes. Perfect square? Yes. 2 times the square root of 4a squared would be 2, times the square root of 49, which would be 7, so that's 28. Nope. Not a perfect square trinomial. All right, factor completely. First thing we notice is that we have a GCF of 2. All these are divisible by 2. So we'll factor that out first, and that gets us 9x squared plus 6x plus 1. Is this a perfect square trinomial? Yes, perfect square. Yes, perfect square. 2 times the square root of 9, which is 3, times the square root of 1, which is 1. So yes, it's a perfect square trinomial. Don't lose the 2. 3x plus is there. and square 1 squared. All right, second one. Looking at this, I see a GCF of 3. So I'm going to factor out a 3 from all of them. Gets me 3 times 4h squared minus 20h plus 25. Is it a perfect square trinomial? Perfect square, yes. Perfect square, yes. Center term, 2 times the perfect square, or square root of 4, which is 2, times the square root of 25, which is 5. 2 times 2 is 4 times 5 is 20. So 3, 2h. Over here, I get my 5, and from here, I get minus, and it's squared. All right, the volume of a rectangular prism is 2x cubed plus 5x squared minus 8x minus 20. Find the dimensions of the prism. Well, immediately I see 4 terms, so that makes me think factor by grouping. 5x squared minus 8x minus 20. So factor these and these. So my GCF of this first one is just going to be x squared. So that would leave me with 2x plus 5. And over here, if I take out a negative 4, that would leave me 2x plus 5. So I get x squared minus 4 times 2x plus 5. Recognize that this is a difference of squares, not the square of difference of squares. So that's x plus 4, x minus 4 times 2x plus 5. That's my solution. All right, what does prime mean? That it only has 2 factors, one in itself. And what's the difference between the difference of squares and square of a difference? So difference of squares means that the 2 numbers are squared with a subtraction. Square of a difference means that the 2 numbers are subtracted and then squared.